welcome back to Fallout, and this is episode 4 of the new Fallout TV series that was aired recently on Amazon Prime. And this is going to be a recap and a critique of the episode, and just to warn you, I will be spoiling this episode and the series as a whole, so watch out for that. Anyhow, let's leap straight in, and we're out in the wasteland again, seeing this rather familiar sight of these houses. I discovered actually that this location is in Namibia, in southern Africa. And it's this old abandoned diamond mine or something like that. But yeah, it's quite famous down there. I can't remember its name. I did know it, but I've forgotten. Yeah, but this is a location from Namibia. Although in the show, this is the location of Crest Studios, where Cooper Howard made all his cowboy movies. So it's a rather poignant location for the Ghoul, a memory of happier times. Anyhow, in the last episode, the Ghoul's medicine was all smashed up. And the Ghoul needs this medicine to stop him going feral. So he's on the lookout for some replacements, and his first stop is this medical centre. And as the pair go inside, we hear this voice saying, "My name is Roger, my name is Roger." And we discover this fellow. And this rather unhappy looking chap is Roger, and he's a ghoul on the verge of turning feral, and he's basically desperately trying to retain his sanity and his sense of self. But the Ghoul and Roger are old friends, and they have quite a natter. I ought to point out here that the sand that Roger is surrounded by is builder's sand, so it's not desert sand at all. It's a little bit disappointing they didn't get the sand right. It looks like they just went to a local builder's merchant and bought half a dozen bags to dump out over the floor. Yeah, unfortunately it doesn't look right, and you can tell the difference. A little niggle, but it did irritate me. Yeah, so we assume the Ghoul has come here looking for the medicine he needs. But it looks as if Roger's already cleaned the place out, and he's sort of begging the Ghoul for some more medicine, but obviously the Ghoul doesn't have any. But they start reminiscing about the old days, with Lucy looking on with a pitiful look on her face, because Roger does seem to be quite a nice guy. But I do find it odd that Roger doesn't comment on the fact that the Ghoul hasn't been seen for the last 20 years. In the very first episode, we heard that the Ghoul character had been buried in this grave for about 20 years. So he's missed a lot of what's been going on recently. But the way Roger greets him, it's like, he saw him last week. So continuity-wise, his reaction to the Ghoul's appearance doesn't really make much sense. And it really wouldn't have taken a lot to fix this. I mean, Roger could have said, "I haven't seen you in years. I thought you were dead." And then the Ghoul replies with a comeback of some sort. It seems that the script writers have actually forgotten the Ghoul's backstory here. But the Ghoul and Roger are chatting quite amicably, reminiscing about better times, when Roger suddenly gets shot in the head. And we know that this was the mercy killing, and that Roger was a goner. But Lucy is still quite shocked to see him splattered in front of her. So after this rather dramatic development, the Ghoul and Lucy have quite a long conversation, during which Lucy slips the fact that her last name is McLaren, and that name appears to have some significance for the Ghoul, because it will turn out in later episodes that Cooper Howard, who is now the Ghoul, actually knew Lucy's father before the bombs fell. However, he doesn't try to clarify this at all. He doesn't say, for example, "You're not the daughter of such and such, are you?" which would have made more sense. He just leaves Lucy's surname hanging in the air. Again, it just seems to be another example of people not asking the questions you'd expect of them. But from this moment on, because the Ghoul does suspect that Lucy is the daughter of an enemy of his, he does start to torment her rather more than he was doing before. I mean, he wasn't treating her very well before, but his behaviour becomes much more hostile towards her. And during this exchange, Lucy also asks the Ghoul why he keeps going on when his life seems so miserable. And again, it would make perhaps more sense if the Ghoul answered that question honestly, because we do find out what's happening in the very last episode, and it's just the fact that the Ghoul is looking for his family. Why he keeps this to himself is not clear. I mean, it shouldn't be a secret, and the more people who knew he was looking for his family, the better his chances would be. So he's keeping secrets for no good reason. Anyhow, the scene ends with the Ghoul chopping up Roger for meat, and he tells Lucy to collect some arse jerky, which she does, and then we get the blood splatter on the Fallout logo. Next up, we're back in Vault 33, and we're in the middle of an election. We have two members of the Triumvirate, Woody and Reg, who are putting up posters, and we briefly see them looking at some prisoners, and these are the raiders who were captured after their failed attack on Vault 33. Well, it wasn't really a failure, the raiders got what they wanted, but they left behind about 12 people or so. all rather desperate looking characters. But it's just a very quick scene in which Reg and Woody are sort of commenting on the difference between them and the people from the outside. Change of location inside Vault 33, and we see Norm looking at his Pip-Boy, where we can see a picture of his father. And he's joined by Betty, who's the third member of the Triumvirate, who comes out with some pie. And Betty is trying to have a heart-to-heart with Norm, because in an earlier town meeting, Norm had said that the Raider prisoners ought to be punished, whereas it was the opinion of most of the other people in the Vault that they should just be sort of integrated into the Vault community somehow, which Norm thinks is a very silly idea indeed, as do I. But Betty's trying to calm him down somewhat, and she makes the rather odd comment that regular boys who get angry will just pee up a wall, which is the first time I've heard of that. But that clever boys like you, well, you're lucky you've not seen where that can lead. So the implication is that a clever boy like Norm, who gets riled up, could cause some real problems. And I do wonder if that's a reference to Norm's father, because later on we discover that Norm's father, Hank, has set off a nuclear bomb in the past. So Betty's comment might be a reference to that. Outside again, and the Ghoul is still searching for medicine. And he's got his arse jerky hanging off the back of his satchel. And it's a shame because the Ghoul does seem to enjoy the sight of Lucy suffering. She's obviously desperate for water, but the Ghoul's not going to help her out. And in fairness, the only sources of water available to them do seem to be very radioactive, according to the Geiger sounds coming out of Lucy's Pip-Boy. So while Lucy is desperately trying to get a drink, the Ghoul starts lecturing her how to survive in the wasteland, and how she'll have to drop her vaulty ways in order to survive. Yeah, there's quite a nice line here. Lucy says, "What are you?" And the Ghoul says, "I'm you, sweetie, just give it a little more time." But while they're talking, he has a coughing fit, which is a sign of the illness taking hold of him, and Lucy makes a break for it. So she does quite well initially, but then is caught up short by the sight of this huge bomb crater, which I'm assuming is the remains of Shady Sands, which we find out more about later in the series. But at this point, Shady Sands and its fate are a bit of a mystery to us. Anyhow, Lucy's hesitation gives the Ghoul a chance to catch up with her and lasso her, and while they're struggling on the ground, Lucy bites off one of the Ghoul's fingers. Now the Ghoul doesn't seem that concerned by the loss of a finger, but still decides to take his revenge on Lucy by chopping off one of hers, which is another little gory scene amongst many. The show does like its gore somewhat. I don't object, but you can have too much. And when the Ghoul is done, he says that right there is the closest thing we've had to an honest exchange so far. Which on one hand is true, but on the other hand, the Ghoul has been anything but straight with Lucy. She's asked him loads of questions, and he's not responded at all. He's played it very close to the chest. And most of the time you think, well, why is he keeping this a secret? Why doesn't he just answer her questions? It's like the script writers are trying to create this fake atmosphere of mystery. So we leave our two chums, each lacking a finger, and we are back in the vault again. And here we see Chet, Lucy's old boyfriend, who's coming to terms with the fact that Lucy has gone. But he's sitting down to his nice Vault-Tec dinner when Stephanie appears at the door. And Stephanie lost an eye in the Raider attack, and also her husband. And she's come round with a box of her husband's things to see if Chet wants any of them. So it's quite an amusing scene, with Stephanie and Chet trying to make awkward conversation. I'm not sure why she brings the picture of her dead husband with her. I don't think that's something Chet would necessarily want hanging on his wall, but she does anyway. And they talk about how Stephanie's husband loved the topic of shoe maintenance, and that once you got him talking about shoes, you couldn't shut him up. And it's sort of presented in a way that she sort of misses this conversation, but also acknowledges that her husband was a deeply boring man. But things progress, and Stephanie starts dressing Chet in some of her husband's old clothes, and her emotions morph into some rather romantic feelings towards Chet, and they start kissing. And it's while Chet is trying to get into Stephanie's jumpsuit, quite literally, that he discovers that her waters are broken, and she's just about to give birth. So it's quite a weird little scene, but it's all played for laughs, and it's quite amusing, and it does establish that Chet and Stephanie are now a couple, or rather, it establishes the reason why they become a couple in later episodes. Out in the wasteland once more, and the Ghoul has taken Lucy to a Super Duper Mart. And while the series was being made, I remember seeing some leaked shots of this location, which got everyone very excited. But I'm a little bit disappointed that we don't see ruins of any of the classic Fallout cars in this scene. I mean, we never do. It would be nice if they could have built one or two, and this would have been the perfect location to show them off. Yeah, the Fallout vehicles are very iconic, and I thought we'd get some, but no, we don't see any at all. We just see authentic old cars. Anyhow, it seems that the Super Duper Mart is some sort of trading post, and the Ghoul uses an intercom in the car park to speak to someone inside, and it's at this point that we hear the voice of Matt Berry, a British actor who I'm very fond of. And this was a lovely surprise. I had no idea that Matt Berry was involved in this project whatsoever. But the Ghoul lays out his terms. He wants 60 vials of medicine in return for one woman in mint condition, and then he remembers her finger and says, well, near mint, which seems to be good enough for Matt Berry, because he tells the Ghoul to send her in. Now Lucy is understandably apprehensive about going inside, but the Ghoul tells her that there's more to worry about outside than inside, and basically threatens to blow her head off if she doesn't get a move on. Now, as soon as Lucy steps inside the Super Duper Mart, we see the Ghoul collapse on the ground, almost unconscious. But Lucy's unaware of this, and we see that she's found this rather creepy kiddies play area, which is all very sinister and atmospheric. And then Matt Berry's character is revealed, and he's a Mr. Handy robot, who seems very cheerful and pleasant. And when he sees that Lucy's finger is injured, he offers to give her some help, which Lucy very gratefully accepts. So the Mr. Handy takes her to this first aid station and offers to replace her finger. Then he opens a drawer to reveal that he's got loads of spare fingers inside there, some of which look very, very old indeed. So he picks one out and manages to attach that to Lucy's stump. And by this point we don't really raise an eyebrow at this, because we become used to the idea that, medicine in the Fallout world is almost like magic. We've seen the Stimpaks do their work, so someone taking a desiccated finger and grafting that onto Lucy's hand isn't really a surprise to us. And Lucy doesn't really seem fazed by it at all. She takes the whole operation in her stride. So once the finger is reattached, Lucy says how grateful she is, and tells the Mr. Handy that she thought she was going to be sold as a sex slave or something. And the Mr. Handy, who we later discover is called Mr. Snip, says, no, what a disgusting idea. I'm simply going to harvest your organs. And then he shoots her in the belly with a dart, which knocks her out. Which is fair enough, I suppose, but it does raise the question of why he bothered to replace her finger in the first place. If he's just going to kill her and harvest her organs, I mean, what's the point, really? And this is a question that Lucy could have naturally asked the Mr. Handy robot. What do you mean you're going to harvest my organs? I need my organs. Why did you stick my finger back on? And Snip could have responded by saying that they only harvest organs from completely healthy individuals and they've got their quality rating to think of, or something along those lines. They could have had a bit of fun with Snip's response. A bit of a wasted opportunity, and we never do find out why he bothered to replace the finger. And really, I'm not altogether certain why they bothered with the finger business in the first place. Did they need Lucy to be injured in some way, so that Snip had the excuse to take her into the medical facility? But in that case, he wouldn't need an excuse, would he? He would just take her there. The whole business with the fingers seems overly elaborate, but it's quite a good gag. It leads to quite a shocking moment. I just wish they could have explained it a bit. Leaving Lucy behind, we go back to Vault 33, and Norm is busy performing his duties serving food to the prisoners. In this case, a rather large and elaborate cake. And the lady behind the desk is quite astonished that the prisoners are getting this lovely jello cake. And Norm essentially says, you can have it. And I thought this woman would just take a slice, but no, she grabs the whole thing and wheels it off. So the woman runs off with a cake, and as Norm is serving the prisoners with the few slices of cake he managed to reserve for them, one of the prisoners says that the people in Vault 32, which was the vault they originally attacked, he doesn't know what the inhabitants of Vault 32 were up to, but it was no good essentially. Which obviously gets Norm thinking, because the next time we see him, he's at a desk and trying to get into the logs of Vault 32, trying to find out what they are up to in there. But as you might expect, it's all classified information, and he cannot access the records at all. Access denied. So this failure leads Norm to go and find Chet, who seems to be rather stressed out by the fact that Stephanie is giving birth in his front room. And when Norm suggests that they go out for a stroll, Chet is more than happy. In the next scene we see Norm's plan. This is the entrance to Vault 32, and it seems that Norm has roped Chet into a mission of exploration. So when we last saw this location, the tunnel that connects Vault 33 to Vault 32 had been blown up by Moldava, the leader of the raiders. But for some bizarre reason, it appears that no one has actually tried to establish communications with Vault 32. I mean, for all they know, there are people in Vault 32 who are still alive, but no one's bothered to clear the rubble away or try to get access to Vault 32. I do feel this is a massive plot hole. As I said, there could be loads of survivors left in Vault 32, but the inhabitants of Vault 33 don't seem to care, and it's not like this tunnel is completely blocked off. It only takes Norm and Chet, a few minutes to clear it. And if I was writing this episode, I would have tried to come up with a better reason why no one had gone into Vault 32. So for example, you could have had, danger radioactivity tape all over the place. And Chet could say to Norm, well, we were told this area is radioactive for various reasons. And if their pit boys were going crazy with the beeps, letting them know that this area was highly radioactive, this would be a very good reason for the inhabitants of Vault 33 to keep away from this place, or at least to delay the rescue mission until they thought of a way of overcoming the radiation. And it might be that it's not radioactivity at all, and that Norm has discovered that someone has been interfering with the Pit Boys just to make it look as if this place is radioactive. I mean, any reason really. There's just got to be a reason why no one from Vault 33 has gone exploring Vault 32. And there just isn't. It's just left in the air. Like I said, massive plot hole. It really is a shame. Anyhow, the guys penetrate Vault 32, and Norm has been here before. We saw him explore Vault 32 to a certain extent in the very first episode. And it's quite obvious that all the crops here have been dead for a very long time. And all the corpses they come across are also all very old. They've been dead for years, so their deaths aren't the result of a recent raid. Whatever happened to them quite a long time ago. And Norm confirms this by checking the pit boy of one of the victims and finding out that the last signs of life were like 2 years ago. So they carry on exploring, and it soon becomes apparent to them that all the people in the vaults have either killed themselves or killed each other. And we start seeing this rather sinister graffiti on the walls, like in this case, "We know the truth." And I'm not sure why this person chose this spot to die in. But he did, and they did it naked too. But back we go to the Super Duper Mart, and Mr. Snip is wheeling Lucy into another room, where for some reason she starts hallucinating about her mother. Anyhow, as Lucy snaps out of it, she realises that she's being pushed down this aisle of chill cabinets, and each of these cabinets has got a prisoner inside, and nearly all the prisoners are ghouls, although some are a bit fresher than others. But there's one person here who's very ghoulified, almost on the verge of turning, and she keeps saying, "Martha, my name is Martha." So this is obviously a callback to Roger, who was also desperately trying to remember their own name and stop from turning completely feral. But Martha looks very small and pathetic, and we feel a lot of sympathy for her. Certainly Lucy does. And then we meet this couple of stoners, and these two stoners seem to run this operation. And this place is, as we've been told, some sort of organ harvesting factory, where they're taking bits and pieces from these ghouls and selling them for God knows what. And you might think that these two fellows might take more of an interest in an attractive young lady like Lucy. But no, they don't seem that bothered at all. And they just tell Mr. Snip to, process her as soon as possible. And to give the ghoul his 60 vials, which is what he asked for. So Lucy, without too much more ceremony, is shunted off into this little side room, where Mr. Snip bears down on her with his circular saw. Right, it's a very dramatic moment, but Lucy's feet haven't been secured, and she manages to kick aside the blade, which luckily does manage to break one of the bonds holding her arm down, and she manages to struggle free. And this is quite a significant bit of luck for Lucy, but we'll let it slide. People do get lucky occasionally. And this next bit is quite fun, because I was expecting Lucy to either run out or to throw something at Mr. Snip, but instead she picks up a couple of defibrillator paddles and electrocutes him, which I think is quite imaginative and resourceful of her. And as you might expect, Snip doesn't respond very well to all this electricity and essentially collapses. So with Mr. Snip down, Lucy starts looking around for weapons and sees this bottle of Abraxo, which is a very strong cleaning fluid from the game. And we're not clear what she's going to do with it, but we assume it's going to be something clever. And in the next scene we discover that she's filled this dart gun with the Abraxo, turning it into quite a lethal weapon. And she threatens the two stoner dudes, saying that if they don't release her and all the ghouls behind her, then she'll destroy Mr. Snip. And the stoners don't seem too concerned by this. They say, well, he's just a robot, do what you like. Which is quite odd really, because I think their whole business does depend on Mr. Snip. And you would think a Mr. Handy robot would be incredibly valuable, far more valuable than a human being. So the fact that they just shrug at Lucy's threat is a little bit stupid in my opinion. Anyhow, Lucy then threatens them, and the guys sort of give up. They press a button that releases the ghouls, or at least releases a few of the ghouls, not all of them. So Lucy obviously notices that Martha hasn't been released, and insists that, Martha goes too. And the guys sort of protest, saying that she doesn't know what she's doing. And to show she means business, Lucy shoots an Abraxo dart at the sofa, which starts to melt it. And the guys decide that they really do have to release all the ghouls. However, they know that the ghouls that they've just released are fairly harmless, but that Lucy is asking them to release some very, very dangerous ghouls. And I think they would be far more afraid of the ghouls than they are of Lucy. So if I'd been writing this scene, I would have had them refusing to release the ghouls. Lucy shoots the dart. They still refuse, saying she doesn't know what she's doing. So she goes over to the control board and just, punches all the buttons on there. I think that would be a more satisfying way of doing it. Because when we see the feral ghouls that are actually released by this, I don't think there's any way that our two stoners would have considered Lucy more dangerous than them. Anyhow, Lucy is initially delighted to see Martha being released, but is then rather more concerned to see these rather dangerous looking feral ghouls emerging from some side cabinets. So these three guys waste no time in attacking. Lucy dives out of the way, and the two stoners are basically killed defending themselves. They manage to destroy the feral ghouls, but are killed in the process, leaving Lucy alone with Martha. And it's at this point that Martha starts to turn, and Lucy, still desperate to help Martha in some way, sort of holds off shooting her. But then Martha attacks and Lucy's given no option. She has to blow Martha's head off with a 10mm. Now it's been pointed out by some that the ghouls in this scene seem to be quite fragile. They go down very easily with just a few shots. Whereas in an earlier episode we saw the ghoul, the cowboy ghoul, take numerous shots to the body and wasn't really affected at all. Yeah, and it does seem to be quite a contradiction. But then again, it might be that feral ghouls are just a bit more fragile perhaps. Once you turn feral, you become like a bit of a glass cannon, in that you can actually deliver a lot of damage, but you can't really take much. Back in Vault 32, and Chet and Norm are still looking around, finding all sorts of unpleasant surprises all over the place. The chief unpleasant surprise being the body of the overseer, who's been tied to his chair and tortured to death it seems. And we see some more graffiti, in this case saying death to management. And it's here that Norm takes the opportunity to do a bit of snooping. He gets into the overseer's computer and starts looking at the security protocols. And it's doing this that he makes the horrifying discovery that the raiders managed to access this vault by using his mother's Pip-Boy. And we've been told in previous episodes that Rose McLean, his mother, died years ago in a famine. So now we have the mystery of how the raiders managed to get hold of her Pip-Boy in the first place. Back in the wasteland, and Lucy is looking very badass in her white t-shirt and her leather straps, and she basically confirms what we've known for a little while now, that the ghoul needs his vials in order to stop going feral. And being a kind girl, Lucy gives him some, saying that, in the wasteland I might end up looking like you, but I will never be like you. Which is quite a nice line, I think. Although at this point the ghoul looks absolutely helpless, so I'm not sure what dropping a bunch of vials in front of his nose is going to do. If I'd written this bit, I would have had Lucy put the vials into an inhaler and put the inhaler into his hand. I mean, it's a minor point, but the ghoul looks absolutely on his last legs. Anyhow, Lucy's done all she's going to do for the ghoul, and she strides off into the wasteland. Back inside the Super Duper Mart, and the Ghoul has recovered. He's obviously had a few blasts at the inhaler, and he has a few more as he staggers in, and then basically starts having all the drugs. If there's anything in an inhaler or a bottle, he just gets it down his neck. Yeah, he basically hoovers up any pharmaceutical he can get his hands on. And then rather oddly, he sees this box full of drugs, takes his hat off and starts filling the hat with the drugs. Whereas, you need the hat to wear, otherwise you wouldn't have it on. And you've already got your drugs packaged in this nice, neat box. So what's the point of doing this? But on the other hand, he is probably as high as a kite at this point, so not thinking rationally. And it's while he's gathering up the drugs that he notices a tape next to the television. And he must have really, really good eyesight, because he can read the writing on this tape from the other side of the room, in what are quite gloomy light conditions. And we see that the film is The Man from Dead Horse, which is the name of the last movie that we saw Cooper Howard starring in. So it's only in the last episode that we saw Cooper actually filming some of the scenes from this movie. And in particular, we see the scene where Cooper recites the Mexican eulogy, "You were ugly, strong, and had dignity," and then says to the man, "Well, 2 out of 3 isn't bad," which we've heard 2 or 3 times in this series so far. And we also see the outcome to the scene, because when we saw it being filmed, Cooper was complaining that the script called for him to shoot the bad guy, and that he didn't want to shoot the bad guy because that wasn't what his character would do. Cooper plays this, honest, decent sheriff. And the director was saying, we've got to show that, good men can do bad things. And here we see the outcome to that, and Cooper the sheriff does shoot the bad guy, so the studio won in the end. Quite a nice moment, I thought, tying together all those strands. And there we go, we end the scene with the Ghoul looking back on himself as Cooper Howard. Yeah, so all quite poignant and affecting. And that's the end of the episode. Quite a short one in this case. I think it's only about 40 minutes long. Thought it was a very good episode. I had some problems with it, but overall very good. Amongst other things, I really enjoyed hearing Matt Berry as the Mr. Handy. And some interesting locations, a lot of progress to the plot being made. So overall, a lot of fun. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Hope to see you again for the next episode. And until I see you again, I shall say goodnight. Okay then, cheerio.